All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Learning Jazz Language. This time, I am just absolutely thrilled to welcome on one of my favorite saxophonists, all around great dude, Sam Dillon. Sam, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Nick. It's an honor to be on the show and this new series that you've put together, which is a topic that I think all of us have like spent so much time thinking about and pondering the very deep and rich history of the music that we have, and basically how these genius musicians were able to create their own way of playing, essentially. So I think it's all par for the course that we're all on here doing this anyway. So thank you for having me.
Definitely, and
Yeah.
it's one of the biggest questions I get, from students or anybody that's concerned with jazz is just like, how do you learn vocabulary? Because obviously it's like the things that we say through the instrument over the tunes. So I guess my first question for you is like, is vocabulary something that you're working on day in and day out in your practice time?
Yeah, I think that that is probably the most uh I don't even the biggest part of my thoughts. I don't even know if I would call it practicing anymore, or I would just call it like observation. If I hear someone play something and it's like a little fragment of anything that I don't know, or it just like kind of piques my curiosity, I'm always gonna just like try to write it down somehow, and then like try to make sure that I can remember it, hopefully. But yeah, I guess that kind of like little bits and pieces of words, so to speak, and things that you know are just inspiring, are is really the constant source of my playing in general. To be honest, I'll have like a lot of students ask about technique, and and the honest answer is that the technique is there because of my practice of vocabulary. I think at some point in college I might have gone back and did a more serious study of like specifically getting scales together. But before that happened, I was concerned with the sound of vocabulary, or I don't even know if I guess, yeah, it's vocabulary, but the sound of specific just groupings of notes that I would hear from Bird or Sonny Rollins or Train or Dexter or whoever, that I was listening to and think, oh, whoa, that's like so cool. That's how I learned what an A minor chord sounded like. For example, it wasn't because I went and learned the A minor scale, but then go back and realize, well, if I'm playing through this information, just being able to go through the scale and get that sound a little better in my ear is going to actually help those little bits of vocabulary kind of have a more of a center to them in my ear and help me to understand exactly where they're coming from. So I think I approached the whole harmonic thing and the whole language thing just literally from language itself, before I even knew or cared what like a minor chord was or a dominant chord was. Like I understood that, but I was like, okay, that's great and everything, but what are the cats playing over this? What are the cats like? What are they doing? And then going back and getting deeper with like maybe a more scale pattern kind of thing.
Cool. Man, well
But
that is such a awesome answer and it brings up a couple of like other questions just
yeah,
hearing what
yeah.
you had to say about that. Um, do you try to like tell your students that like, hey, don't worry about what it is. Just first find the stuff that you like the sound of and like we'll worry about actually what it is later? Like, is that an approach you take with some of your students?
Yeah, yeah, it's actually a really, really important approach, because I'll have some of them come to me and say, "Oh man, I need to learn some theory, or more specifically, this is some of the stuff that I like to play, but I don't know where to put it, and I don't know what a 2-5-1 is. I don't know how that works. And my short answer to them is that part of just exploring and starting to figure things out and get it together deals with simply just playing some stuff. And I'll show them. I've done this with many students. Play any random 4 notes or any random 8 notes, and they'll play it, and I'll be like, well, that's cool. Let's think about what this is. And I always get back to the point that, like, no matter what you do, no matter what you play, it is a 2-5-1. So the deeper lesson there is that we'll get to the theory and we'll get to their understanding of the fact that we can put all of anything that you're thinking in your in your consciousness. You're aware of how it falls into basic harmony, which is really important. But the first thing, the impetus, the first thing that you did was just because you heard it. And so it almost, for some of them, I do see that it helps them because it validates their creative, their creative side. It makes them think like, oh, wow, well, if I can do anything, then why am I doing it? And that gets to an even deeper level, which some of them, I don't know if they're totally able to process. I don't even know if I'm able to process it, because on a very deep level, and then also on a surface level, it boils down to what you like. And what does that mean? What does that mean? And I don't know if you should really judge yourself too hard for that. It's like Jimmy Heath said, you hear what you like, and that means we're all just taking stuff, that we thought, oh, that sounds cool. That's basically what this is. We're all just like, oh, that sounds cool. That sounds cool. That sounds cool. And trying to put it together. And the process of putting it together means that we need to know what chords and what tunes and where things come from. But it starts and stops with what you really, what you think sounds cool and what you think sounds good, Um, and I guess as far as that goes, I do think that, there might be a misconception about at least my development. Or there might not be, actually, but either way, my approach really came from hearing Sonny Rollins, Sonny Stitt, Train, Bird, and not actually really wanting to emulate them exactly. It was really thinking to myself, wow, these guys can play lines through everything. Like, and thinking to myself, well, if I want to be able to play, I better be able to play lines through all the chords. And really coming at it from not necessarily specifically just Stitt or just Sonny, and trying to make sure that I can emulate those players perfectly. It was almost more of my own ego saying to myself, okay, I want to try to compile as much vocabulary together so I can kind of just have that ability. It was my own uh, just kind of observation about how to put together music, and or get myself to a place where I felt like I was actually playing, and and on a lot of levels, I think that is more of a healthy approach, because you know you're not necessarily going to always be able to perfectly emulate or sound exactly like any one of these players. You always have to maintain a sense of your own identity, and through that process, I do think that was something that I was always able to do, because I could hear Train play a great line, and I'm like, all right, I'll, that's an idea I haven't heard before. I'm going to throw that in my pot, or a Sonny Rollins lick, and okay, that's a great. I'm going to throw that in my pot. But it was all about me compiling my vocabulary, my ability to speak clearly through serious study of these other players. It's not about, okay, I'm going to learn this Sonny Rollins solo. Now what? And I think that that happens a lot. I think at a certain level, and I notice that with students too. Okay, I learned this train solo, so okay, now what, man? And I'm like, well, what do you mean now? What did you know? Did you hear like the level of detail in the solo? Did anything that happened in that solo make you say, "Wow, that is so inspiring"? I wonder if I can do that in 20 other places in on a tune, or I wonder if I can turn that one thing into my own kind of pattern. Or you know, all of these things are there to help us become, you know, more of ourselves, really.
Right. Right.
And
And
yeah,
yeah, I love hearing you say that because I think it's true. It's like, and there's also something that comes from like, even if you didn't think about it past being able to play it with train. I mean,
right.
you know how many things you're going to get out of that?
Of
You know,
course. Yeah,
even if
yeah,
you didn't
right,
even
right.
consider any of the notes, any of the changes, just the fact that you could play along with train and you could play that information, I feel like that's going to do a lot.
Oh man, it does way more actually than the analysis will. That's for sure. And that's exactly right, because now you're connected to the time, you're connected to the tone, you're connected to the inflection, and also super importantly, you're connected to the emotion, you're connected to the emoting, you know, the ability to really get behind the notes you're playing and put some stank on it, you know. And that's just so important too, um, because all of my favorite players today, um, the first thing that I'm listening for, I mean, I want them to have a lot of stuff together, and I want to hear all that, but I want it to be stuff that they're really feeling, and that they're playing from their heart, you know. And that's usually always what captivates me, you know.
That's great, man. I
So
love that. So, if we go like into your process as it currently stands, right?
mhm,
I
mhm,
think
mhm.
one thing is how do you get from that thing you mentioned, like, well, I'm just writing it down. Like, I'm just making sure I'm sort of cataloging everything that, as you mentioned, I like the sound of, because if I like the sound of it, it's going to stand a much better chance of actually coming out in my playing.
Right.
What's your process like from getting from that, like, all these written down ideas that are, you know, maybe out of context, like what do you do to actually get them to be a part of your playing? Do you have any kind of
Right.
process around that, or
Right. Well, and actually, the key word is exactly what you just said, like become a part of you. And the way that that happens is that there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, and you can approach it from a very specific, and I think you should approach it from all of the ways that I'm about to talk about, but you can approach it from a very specific harmonic standpoint. If you have one idea, and you can take it through all of the different, you know, you can find 20 a billion permutations of the one thing, and then think about how to apply it in different places over 251. And 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 you should do that. But the thing that is going to really contribute to your musicality is if you put it in some form of context on a tune. And if you put it in like for me, it's been a blues. For me, it's always, I've always gone back to a blues in every key, and then kind of had like an idea of like like a middle ground between, okay, I'm just going to play straight up, you know, the vocabulary, or I'm just going to be completely free and go for something and see what happens, versus like this middle ground where there's a few ideas that I have. And one of the things that I think is really helpful is that once you have that idea, and this actually is a really important part of it, that if you have that one shape or idea or line, and you have that worked out under your fingers in every key, and it's cool, you can go make an Instagram post and make everyone freak out and say wow. And you know, you play it up in half steps, down in half steps, up in whole steps. You can play it in 5/4, 7/4, you know, do go through the whole gamut of everything you can do with that one lick. Then you have that, that's great. But then when it comes time to putting it on a blues or there'll never be another you or whatever, you want to find how many places in the tune you can put that. And actually, when you really get down to it, that's just as limitless as all of the permutations that you have. And it's just as limitless in the amount of keys that you can do it to. So you get to a point where it's almost like, uh, it's like the scene from the Matrix where it's like, it's not the spoon that moves, it's the world around it. And you get to that place, especially on a blues, like even if we were going to talk about like harmonically, okay, we're in our G7. Okay, well, yeah, we learned the whole standard progression, but like even in the first measure, and I was just talking to a student about this, we can make that first measure incredibly complex just by saying, okay, well, for the first beat, we're going to go up a half step, and then the second beat we're going to resolve to back to the main key, and then the next beat we're going to play the tritone sub going to the four chord, right? And already that's just one measure. And so if we have that ability, and those are still just fairly standard substitutions. If we had a slower blues and we hit the top of the head and we wanted to put something, train changes, and do it that way, put train changes up a half step, then train changes in the original key, and then go to the tritone. We could do it with that, and that's like enough 16th notes to last you know you don't even need to play anymore and you could just play melody for the rest of the chorus. So it's this amazing combination of kind of having an idea of all of these harmonic devices in the back of your head, and then also a, an idea of what vocabulary you're going to specifically use, and then kind of seeing where things go. And it's analogous to even me, having my coffee and thinking about, oh man, what am I going to say on Nick's show? Like, I mean, I have a few ideas of what I'm going to say, but I didn't know if I was going to definitely get to this point specifically this way. And that's the beauty of conversing with someone, that you reveal certain things, and it's inspiring, and it makes you and I could talk for 5 hours, I'm sure, so it's very analogous to that, like having an idea of what you want to talk about, and then what context you're going to play it in, and then just seeing where it goes. And it takes, it's a work in progress, because both of those sides of the brain are things that you constantly need to be developing, right? And but to answer your first question, really, for me, it's about thinking about the context of whatever it is that you might be playing. Maybe it's someone's original song, maybe it's a standard, a blues, rhythm changes. But once you have the piece of information, it's kind of like a process of surrounding it with your basic vocabulary, and then having it kind of creep in there. And that's what for me starts to make my ear and my mind kind of like hold on to it longer, because it doesn't just exist as like its own pattern anymore, you know uh
I love that, man. And I love what you're talking about because, like, it goes back to something you said earlier where we hear from a lot of students, like, now what? But I feel
yeah,
like if you get into this mindset, you would almost never say that to yourself,
right,
right?
right,
Because you'd
right.
just be like, well, now what? Just come up with a different way to iterate it, put it in a different place.
Yeah,
Try
yeah,
it here. If it sucks, who cares, right? Try it in a
right.
different place. I feel like that is such a huge piece of wisdom, is like, if you can get yourself to that place where you never say now what and you just continuously experiment, you're never going to run out of stuff to work on.
Right, right. Or even more profoundly, actually, the question is the answer. It is now what? Like it's now what, man? You're right, but it's not in the negative like way, like, oh, I'm supposed to be good now.
Right,
It's like yeah,
right.
which is what we're talking about. But like the answer, you're right. Yeah, the answer is it is like, yeah, now what? Now what are you gonna do with that?
I
So
love that, man.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
so beautiful. Yeah, I love how you just flipped that. That's great. So, I guess sort of my last question here is how has your approach to vocabulary and like how you deal with it, how you learn it, how you pick it up, what you do with it, how has that changed over the years, like with your development? How might it look different now than it looked, 10 years ago for you? Can you give us any wisdom on kind of how the
Yeah,
process goes doing this?
yeah, yeah. I think okay. So, like I said, for me specifically, I would hear all of these masters play, and I would think to myself, man, I gotta learn how to just burn. I gotta learn how to just play through, all of these uh, chord changes and tunes, and just be able to play anything starting on any note, and almost kind of, in my early in high school and college, almost approaching it in kind of like a self-defeating angry kind of way that I think we all go through, and just trying to muscle through playing 16th notes. And I think that has its own time and place. But you get to a point with that where you become conscious of actually what you're playing over the chord, instead of just this concern of 16th notes. So I think for me, what has changed is is if I'm going to learn a tune or anything, I think that because all of the all of the information I feel more confident about and that I have together, that I'll actually go through a song or something in a much simpler, much more almost melodic, but almost it's not it's I don't want to say stupid, because any student that's doing it, it's not stupid, but almost overly practical way, like literally just go through 1 3 5 7 and just make sure that I'm hearing it, or maybe arrive at a melody, and just try to try to just get the sound of the song in my ear from a very basic, fundamental standpoint, because I know that if I have that kind of like almost mapped out in my ear, in my head, that once I get going, everything else is going to start to fall in line. But if I don't do that, I'm just going to kind of be like, oh, what am I doing on this new tune, And so if it's some complicated song that a friend writes, or some Wayne Shorter tune with major sharp five chords, I'm gonna want to carefully go through that, and kind of intimately be aware of how every note is going to resolve to the next chord, and just do it slow, out of time, also too, and what's amazing about that, and I was watching Steve Cortiga's interview, and what he's saying is that he'll get inspiration just from going through a tune, because he'll wind up on something that is there, and you could you that'll you're off to the races, because that one thing will give you a whole, like, so yeah, and I couldn't agree with that more. It's like at this point, the information and the stuff that's going to give you another, like, 4 hour practice session is already in the song. You just got to look at like what's in front of you. So yeah, that's something that's changed. Yeah, because before, maybe if I had a song, I'd be like, all right, I just need to make sure that I really get my shh together, and I would just maybe write out a whole chorus of 16th notes where everything perfectly attached to the chord, and just like drill it, so I could really have that in my back pocket. But it at some point, that becomes unnecessary to need to do. um, and you start dividing things up this way with technique over here, harmony here, creativity here, and you're it's a little more of a Zen kind of thing that actually is actually ends up happening for real, which is kind of crazy to realize. You just kind of, if you beat your head against the wall long enough, you're gonna actually break the wall down.
Oh man, I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
that. That's like there's no more perfect way than on that, right?
yeah,
It's like all those things you just talked about, and then but at the end of the day, you just got to keep coming back and doing it over
yeah,
and over again.
yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I mean, just so many ideas floating around in my own head now. And I hope all the viewers kind of walk away with that too. I'm sure they will. Can you tell people like where to find you online? Anything you have going on that you want people to know about?
Oh, sure. Actually, well, yeah, I'm SD saxophone on Instagram, and I SD saxophone just was something that naturally occurred to me. But then, in retrospect, from a marketing standpoint, the fact that I had saxophone in my name ended up being like a good thing, and now everyone's like thinking of saxophone or whatever. But that was like way back before this. So yeah, SD saxophone on Instagram, or just Sam Dillon on Facebook, samdillonmusic.com. But my email is sdillonmusic. Don't email Sam Dillon Music. That's a very disgruntled piano player in New Orleans, who gets mad at me, and I can't seem to figure out where he's playing or if he's actually even doing anything. But that's a whole nother story. Um, and I have a really cool, a few gigs coming up that are really cool. One in particular is with my very good friend and amazing alto saxophonist Andrew Gould. We have a gig coming up at the Jazz Loft out on Long Island. That's going to be this weekend, and it's going to be on Train's birthday. So it's a little jazz festival out there. So looking forward to that. And yeah, just usually playing somewhere in the city. Um, if anyone wants to come to a show, just hit me up, and I'll let you know if I'm playing, and if not, I might be hanging out. So I'm usually around somehow.
I love it, man. That was what I was gonna say too. If you ever find yourself in New York City, definitely look up Sam's name because I'm he's almost always playing somewhere. But yeah, thanks for your time, man. I really, really appreciate having you on this show. You and I go back a ways. We have that transcription book if anybody wants to check that out. It's
Yeah.
all of Sam's solos from his record Out in the Open, which if you haven't checked that out, you gotta go check out that record. And it's always fun to hang, Sam. So thanks for doing this.
Nick, thank you so much for having me on, man. It was a lot of fun.